Hi, welcome to a new episode of Engineering Rebuilt.
Do you think you know a lot about construction?
Maybe we can provide a fresh perspective.
This is a podcast where we rebuild preconceptions of engineering,
Reclaim the narrative,
and share the voices of women from across the construction industry. Why not join us?
Let's get started.
Hello, and welcome to our latest episode of the Engineering Rebuild podcast. I'm your host, Tina Gunnarsson, and together with Yvonne Raleigh, we are joined today by Kristina Scheibler-Frood. Kristina, welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Tina. Thank you.
Lovely to have you here. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Kristina Scheibler-Frood. I'm a principal structural engineer with AECOM in London. I've been with AECOM for nearly 10 years now, since I graduated in 2012 from Nottingham University. I've been a structural engineer right through from a graduate through to now, and my main work is around refurbishments of listed buildings, existing buildings around London, deep basements, and retained facades. So that's me.
And there are a lot of retained facades in London, so I imagine it will keep you busy for quite a while.
I certainly hope so. Yeah, there are a lot, and hopefully even more going into the future. We've got so many heritage buildings in London coming to the end of their useful life, I suppose, and there's always the question going forward about what to do. Do you demolish buildings, start again, or do you refurb, reuse, repurpose? So I hope going forward there's a lot more of the repurposing, retrofitting, making them appropriate for modern life.
Yeah, it seems incredibly wasteful to keep demolishing. I mean, if you look at the carbon footprint of a building and then you demolish it, that carbon, you've created the carbon, and then you've totally destroyed any benefit you're getting from it, and then you're going to create another carbon footprint to replace it. It makes absolutely no sustainable sense.
No, absolutely, and especially now that we're sort of ever more cognizant of our impact as engineers on sustainability, carbon footprint, the environment generally. I think we're really at a turning point in the industry. Upgrading buildings is really not that difficult. It's really not that complicated. Even as little as retrofitting for sort of showers and bike services, now that a lot more people are cycling in, maybe providing some roof terrace space for people to be able to get more sort of time outdoors. Even if you want to put additional floors on buildings, there's a lot that can be done. I had a project a couple of years ago, and it was a sort of a 6-story historic building from the 1860s. The client looked at it and they said, "Oh, what can we do to get additional space in there?" And it had grand floor to ceiling heights, far in excess of building standards nowadays. So in the back half of the building, we managed to fit 3 extra levels. There was a bit of strengthening to the foundations, putting in a bit more structure, but 3 more floors in an existing building didn't change how it looked from the outside, and you get so much more out of it. So the possibilities really are endless. I think it just depends how creative you want to be and how much you want to spend at the end of the day.
No, I was going to ask, what are some of the more creative requests your clients have?
So one of our projects, sort of been working on it for the last 7 or 8 years, number 1 Palace Street, and it's the existing building was originally, it's next to Buckingham Palace, and it was originally the Palace Hotel for sort of the overspill of guests from the palace. So very prestigious, Grade 2 listed. So there's a lot of history there. But it was I think used as government offices for several years. When our client bought it and wanted to turn it into residential use. So it had existing timber floors, quite lightweight, but not particularly robust. No sound separation between the floors. So I said, really, we need concrete floors in there, acoustics, fire, etc. So we looked at it and said, okay, you've got an existing frame, it's got A capacity, but we need to do some strengthening. So we did material testing, strengthened beams, columns, added new foundations, and actually we jacked the building up onto the new foundation. So the building didn't move up per se, but the load was transferred into these new foundations. Everything was tied together. You wouldn't know anything had happened below ground, but it meant that it was fit for purpose for its new life, and it's beautiful apartments now. So that was certainly one of the more interesting projects. We also on the same project, but outside of that building, we had a retained facade around part of the site. So again, a steel frame erected outside, holding the facade in place while we put foundations in behind it. We excavated a basement, making sure it didn't move during the whole time. And it's all being tied back in now. The building's being fitted out. It's due for completion in the next few months. And the facade's looking brilliant. They've just started to take all the wrap off from the building, so you can see everything. And it's remarkable. So it's things like that. I do love an engineering challenge. It can feel quite daunting at the start, but there's always a way.
Absolutely love that you mentioned One Palace Street, because I was involved in doing some temporary works for the facade retention really early doors, and I remember it just being the most absolutely crazy temporary works I'd ever it was at the start of my career, but it was absolutely crazy in terms of temporary works, and it was really exciting. So we've probably worked on the same project, and our paths must have crossed at some point, which is Yvonne, sorry, I interrupted you earlier. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, refurbishment of like existing office type or other structures is relatively simple. Do you get involved in stuff that's more change of purpose in a more drastic way? I mean, there's some quite interesting like refurb projects going on where we're going from being a power station to being office space. Are those kind of with the move to brownfield usage and can you repurpose it, or do you have to knock it down? Obviously, the ultimate benefit is to repurpose a brownfield rather than to have to knock it down and start again.
Yeah, so I mean, from personal experience, I've not been involved in anything quite so drastic. I think probably the biggest change I've been involved in is from an existing hospital building in Fitzrovia to residential accommodation, and really, if you look at if the structure's there, you can always add more columns. You can thread structure through. You can strengthen foundations. You can get mini piling rigs if it needs that. It might be pad foundations. There's so much that can be done inside a building to change the use. We actually had another project that went for planning several years back now, and again that had been a hospital, I think during the war, and it was being turned into residential apartments. And again, the grid worked generally. Some columns needed to be removed. We put sort of steel frames in that went all the way down. We removed some walls and put some box frames in for the stability. And really, you can break all of the problems down into a few much simpler problems, even in an existing building. It's all about how are we going to get the load down to the foundations. And once you manage to break it down, then you can solve it. It's when it's one big problem and you think, where are we going to start? That it's a real challenge.
So which bit of what bit of your day makes you smile the most?
Oh, that's such a tough one because it's so varied. Some days I'm on site, some days some days on 2 or 3 sites, but I'll be doing a survey one day looking at sort of an existing building, looking at defects, how can we repair the building, and the next day I'll be on a different site looking at they're about to pour concrete for a design that I've done, but there's something here that doesn't quite work, or there's a bit of existing structure here, so we can't get everything in as we thought. What are we going to do? We need to know now. That I love it and I hate it. That pressure. It's you haven't got a second to think. Oh God, the day's dragging a bit. The time goes so quickly. But I love being involved in that immediate solution. And you get to the end of the week and you've solved that, and that, and they've built something. So I think that's probably the most exciting part for me. And then being able to see your design become a reality, become a building. And I really look forward to, as the years go by, being able to wander around and look at even more buildings and go, I designed that, or I've been involved with that. I know how that stands up. You wouldn't believe what's under those foundations. I love that side of it. But there's so much more as well. We've obviously got a lot of younger engineers join our team. I'm heavily involved in their development, bringing them onto projects, taking them to site, sharing experience, and trying to sort of, I suppose, nurture their excitement and why they came into the industry in the first place, and develop their skills. There's so much to it, and I really love most of the aspects of it. I'm not going to say all aspects because there are certainly some bits that are less enjoyable.
How do you, so like a big draw, I think, for people when they first join the industry is this idea that they will make their mark on the skyline or on infrastructure or whatever that is. How do you get people excited about refurb, which is going to become an increasingly important part in civil engineering, right? We're going to start moving towards refurbing as much as we possibly can instead of new build. Have you got any, I guess, ideas for how to get people excited?
I mean, it's always a difficult one. It's something I've thought about all the way through, and it's from even going into schools and trying to just showcase some of the things we're involved with. I think actually podcasts like this and videos of some of the projects that we've done are a brilliant way to bridge that. Social media is changing so much, every week, every year, and really people don't have that much time. They don't want to spend time reading about something. Nobody's going to put that time. If you can just grab them with a few sharp images or a little video that really showcases what's underneath. Everybody sees the finished building, everyone sees the architecture, everyone sees the vision, but the exciting bit for me is what goes underneath. And I think for a lot of people as well, I think if you can show that and show some of the steps in building it, time lapses from site, that sort of thing. I think that's it. We've just got to get it out there a bit more. People don't know what we do as engineers. What do you do as a structural engineer other than a house extension? Like that's what people think of structural engineers, I think, often. So yeah, getting it out there and certainly moving with the times, shall we say?
Yeah, we really are bad at our own PR. I've spent most of my career working on heavy infrastructure, so roads, bridges. I drive around the M25 and the kids are like, "Oh, Mum, you built this bit." It's like, yeah, let's drive on the hard shoulder. That was mine. Let's perhaps not drive on the hard shoulder. And when I then went on to build Spinnaker Tower, which I did just before I had children, that was one of those projects where you go, actually, hooray, finally something everybody wants to talk about because it's big and it's glamorous and it's spiky and it's stuck in the middle of the harbour and everybody sees it all the time when they're coming in and out of Portsmouth. And I spent 3 years talking on the radio every day about how we were building it and what we were doing, and everybody really engaged with the project. But I think for me, the frustration is that most projects are as interesting as Spinnaker Tower. It's just that the wider public doesn't realise that they are that interesting. And if we took the time to engage with media, if we took the time to say to people, I spent like 20 minutes on the radio every morning, Solent Radio, for 3 years, telling them what was going on in that day and what they'd see if they walked past the project, what was going on behind the scenes that you couldn't see inside the shafts. Today we're putting in the stairs, we're putting in some more stairs, we're still putting in stairs. There's 350 stairs to go. It's going to take a while, guys. Those kind of conversations. But it was really interesting, the engagement and the number of people that were really sort of touching base with the project and wanting to know more about it. And if we use that same approach on other projects, whether it's a motorway or it's a refurb project or it's a power station or it's a hydroelectric scheme or whatever it is, all of those projects have that interest in them. It's just that we fail to package it in a way that captures the imagination of the public.
Yeah, I think that you absolutely hit the nail on the head. And that's the thing. We're engineers, first of all. We're also sort of, managers, and we're also, thinking about the PR and everything else that goes with it. But we all came into this fundamentally as engineers, and it's difficult, and you need to get into, I suppose, a different way of thinking, a different way of talking about your job. People say, "Oh, what did you do today? Oh, how was it?" Yeah, and you always play it down because you think, "Oh, nobody really wants to know." But actually, if we took a bit of our enthusiasm with us when we talk to other people about it, I think that would be infectious. I think a lot of people are interested in how things, but you do tours of sort of the London Tower Bridge and things like that, and people find that really interesting, and you see all the exposed structure. And I assume other people find it as exciting as I do, but I really think they do. And maybe if we had more opportunities like that, not saying the public should be touring construction sites necessarily, but getting the information out there, I think that would certainly spark an interest, and especially in younger people as well. Don't know what a civil engineer is when you're 12, when you're 15, when you're 18, really, do you? And I'm a structural engineer, which is just one part of civil engineering, and there are whole other branches of engineering as well. There's so much for everyone, I think, in our industry.
I think you both hit it spot on there, right? And I as you're saying these things, I'm reflecting upon how I speak with non-engineers about my job, and I definitely play it down because I go, "Oh, you don't want to hear about concrete or holes in the ground." Or if I spoke with the same enthusiasm that I speak to engineers about the technical stuff, I wonder if they maybe would be more interested. I'm going to give that a try next time I speak to...
Yeah, do you know what? I'm going to as well.
I like this. We've got some actions.
That's the reason I love doing STEM stuff. I mean, I do work with schools from kids from 3, so I do nursery up. Now you think, well, what does a nursery child want to know about engineering? Actually, nursery children are the best, because I've met nursery children who I talked to 5, 6, 7 years ago, and they're still interested when you see them further up the school, and you're coming back in, and they're like, "Oh yeah, can we do the spaghetti thing again? Can we? What have you got? Have you got that reinforcement bar? Have you still got that 50mm reinforcement bar? Can you remind so and so wasn't here when you did the first talk? Can you tell him how that bit of reinforcement went into that tower and why it was important?" And those conversations are really interesting because the kids don't know that they shouldn't be interested. So as soon as you engage them, they really, really get it. And I mean, walking in, I normally walk in with like a hard hat on and my yellow jacket and everything, so that you can't see that I'm really a woman. And then you take the hat off and they're like, "Oh my goodness, it's a girl." And that helps in itself, because they're like, "Oh, a different thing. You're not a hairdresser, you're not this or you're not that." And that breaks those barriers down. But it really helps with, they are naturally curious. And if we can increase their curiosity at that age, then they remain curious. I mean, engineers are basically curious children that didn't grow up. We continue to want to solve problems all through our careers, and that's a good thing. I mean, I'm quite happy to be a curious child until I die, and certainly hope to remain so.
Absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. It's that fun problem solving element. I mean, I'm so guilty of it in the office. You know, you've got a to-do list that's ever growing, and then somebody comes over with a real problem, and they go, "Oh God, I've got this building, and I need to build this, but we can't build this yet, and I don't know how are we going to build this." And you go, "Oh, let's have a look at it." And you could spend 2 or 3 hours on that, and it's not, you know, ticking things off the to-do list, but it's very real problem solving, and we're all guilty of it. There are so many people in my office. I know if I say to my boss, "Oh, you just come and have a look at this. What do you think? I was thinking this." You can sit there for an hour and a half, and you go, "Weren't you busy?" You know. Yeah, we all love it as engineers. There's nothing better than feeling like you've solved a problem. Then you feel like you're done for the day, and it's 5 o'clock, and you haven't got through the list.
I mean, it's a pretty good feeling doing a like group problem solving session. I feel that's a key part of engineering. So one of the recurring questions we ask our guests is what you would like to see happening in the construction industry in the next 5 years.
I mean, I think really the next 5 years, you know, we touched on it earlier, and you know, the climate crisis and how much of an impact we have as engineers. And I think, to be honest, I want to see reuse and refurbishment being the first thing that clients go for, you know, rather than, we've got this building, right, how long to demolish it, right, how long to build this. We just don't need to do that. There is so much you can do with an existing building. You know, even if you wanted to, you know, add 10 stories on top of it. Okay, it's not possible for everything. Depends what you're starting with. But there are so many opportunities. You could thread new columns through it and put a whole new foundation system in. I mean, depends how far you want to go. But the mentality of the industry has to change, and it needs to be refurbishment as, yeah, obviously, and if you're not going to do that, then do you really need to knock it down? Okay. And of course there are situations where demolition is going to be more appropriate. It depends where the building's located. There might be sort of brownfield sites and so on, with derelict buildings. Okay, fine, single story garage or something a bit different. But no, I think especially in our cities, we have to make that change, because the climate crisis is only going one way at the moment, and you know, we have a duty to make that change. We have a duty to tell our clients how to make that change. So yeah, I think next 5 years is going to be critical for that, and I hope to be able to, I suppose, communicate that better to clients. I know I don't do a good enough job of that at the moment. But yeah, I think there needs to be a real drive.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are you involved at those like early stage conversations? You know, like Yvonne works a lot in bid stage, which is really early doors. Are you involved at all in, I guess this is a question for both of you. So Kristina, you speaking to the client, and Yvonne, does refurb come up when you do your bid work? I guess Kristina first, yeah.
So, yes, I mean, sort of not. I don't personally get involved too much with clients at the earlier stage, but you know, my line manager, a lot of our directors who have that long-standing relationship with clients, and they'll pick up the phone and they'll go, thinking about buying this site. What do you think you could do with it? We're thinking about something like this. Do you think you need to knock it down? Do you think you could refurb? What do you think? So yeah, and it's, I suppose it's building relationships with clients so that they feel they can have those conversations with you, and just, you know, pick your brain. What's your opinion? What do you think? So yeah, absolutely. As engineers, we get involved at that stage, and that's really, I think, when we can make the biggest influence. And it's, I suppose, just being a little bit more open-minded, rather than we're all, I'm sure, guilty of sort of sticking with what we know. I love designing concrete. I love concrete buildings, but again, I need to branch out. And I think it's the same for everyone. A slight change in mentality, and I think we can really drive it from the start.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we've seen a real move in a lot of what we do now in terms of tendering is in the aviation sector, and we've seen a real move from the clients to say what we actually want from our maintenance programs is you not touching our assets. We want you to be more intelligent in how we understand our assets, and so there's a big focus on understanding the asset, understanding the residual life of the asset, and understanding the point at which you need to actually take action so that you don't have to do the total replacement, so that you can look at alternatives. You can say, okay, well, if we GPR this area of pavement, what's going on underneath it? Can we then insert some kind of geopolymer solution or something under that pavement so that we don't have to then dig it up and replace it because the foundation is failing, but actually the top surface is in good condition? You wouldn't necessarily know. I know National Highways are doing the same. They're looking at what's going on underneath their assets, what's happening below the surface, so that they can understand how those assets are working, so that they can make sure that they don't have to do those big carbon heavy projects of rip it out and replace it. And there needs to be much more focus on that. I mean, yes, capital projects are always going to exist because we're going to need to expand infrastructure, HS2 or Crossrail or whatever you want to call it. When we don't need to expand infrastructure, when the infrastructure is there, we should take care of that infrastructure. And we're seeing that a lot. And where we don't see it from clients, quite often in our tenders now, the contracting tenders that we're involved with, the contractor will say to them, look, have you thought about proposing to the client that instead of doing this work and this work, they could actually just rejuvenate this and do this instead? And yes, okay, it's going to reduce the overall cost of the project, which is good for the client, not necessarily good for my client, but it also creates a more sustainable solution. And then you engage with that client on a longer term basis because you've shown them that you care about how their asset is maintained.
Yeah, that's something I'd say think about less is the maintenance and the use and operation of the asset. We're all very focused on the pre-construction and the construction because that's the exciting bit, right? And very little thought is put into the maintenance. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And there's this shift in mindset, isn't there? So I remember when I was at university, I think it was one of my professors, they said, geotechnics is almost the opposite of the other branches of engineering, because in other branches you start with nothing and you build up. You design your steel, you design your concrete from nothing, and you know everything about those materials and those properties. Whereas in geotechnics, you start with the ground and everything is there. And then you have to work out what's there. And I feel refurb is along the same line of problem solving and that thinking where you start with something that's already there. I guess you don't always have the best information and the best access to what's there, and there's some sort of forensics you've got to do. And then from there you develop your solution.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I've never thought of it like that. I never really got on with geotechnics at university. When something just doesn't click. But now that you put it like that, that's so true. I suppose the only thing about refurbs is because it's above ground, you have a bit more opportunity to actually access the frame and you can sort of test things. Whereas when you're going into the ground, you're sort of only as good as your borehole and where you've put it, sort of, and see what comes out there. But no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and record drawings. Obviously, nowadays you have to put the record drawings in the O&M manuals at the end of a job, so that when they come to refurbish it, the next engineer knows exactly what's there and they can make the adaptations. But no, the buildings that we deal with, there are more often than not no record drawings. Sometimes there are a few drawings, but not a full set. You have to go round and work out how you think the grid is, how you think it's standing up. Then you specify your opening up works. Then when you know where the frame is, you specify testing works for the materials and, trial pits for the foundations. And it's yeah, it's so involved to get from an initial look at a building and go, we could probably do this to it and probably do this to it, but we won't really know until we actually get in there and start ripping everything off and see what's actually there. It's it's it is like geotechnics from that side. You have to make assumptions and then somewhere along the line prove them.
Now, I was going to say, I can't believe we've got through half an hour already. It's shocking how fast time flies when you are having fun. I'm just wondering, as a kind of a final-ish point, not cutting Tina off, but if somebody was thinking of joining the industry, what would you say to them?
Absolutely, go for it. I mean, look into the different branches of engineering though, because it's so broad. You know, it can feed all sorts of different types of interest, personality. You know, get some work experience, because ultimately that's the best way to understand it. You know, and I suppose research a little bit. You know, go on LinkedIn, listen to podcasts like this, find out what's out there, and talk to engineers. You know, and hopefully we can share our experiences and encourage you into the industry.
I think that's a bit of brilliant advice to end the podcast on. So thank you so much for joining us on the Engineering Rebuilt podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on and just learning a little bit more about refurb and about what you do. So I think with that, we will thank you for coming on the podcast and thank our listeners, and hope you join us next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Engineering Rebuilt. We hope you enjoyed being part of the conversation. Please join us next time to hear more diverse stories from people who are reclaiming their narrative to rebuild engineering.